I hope everybody can hear me okay. I think we can probably start now. We have all of our panelists online, and we have our executive producers, Nanchi Ravishankar, and our technical support, Celeste and Gerald, all from UNICEF headquarters. My name is Uyen, and I lead a section on innovation and learning in the evaluation office. And it is my pleasure to host the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. It is the Sdsm Pathway Fellows that will be presenting ideas that they've had, projects that they have conceptualized, implemented, and scaled in some places to address the issues of the climate crisis. We're hosting this today on UNICEF's newest platform, the Global Development Commons, where the main objective is to bring in people from the outside to contribute their ideas to what works about children. So I don't want to take too much more time. I would like to thank everyone to participating today, and inform you that continue to check the space, gdc.unicef.org. Anybody is able to register and upload content. We're watching the space as an organization. We want to hear ideas that work from local communities. We're highlighting a youth series every month where we demonstrate or we showcase the work of some of these very talented people. So with that, I'd like to thank you for participating and introduce Kyle Felter, our GDC champion from Harvard University. Over to you, Kyle.
Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to this webinar series hosted on the Global Development Commons. As Yuan said, my name is Kyle Felter, and I've been involved with the Global Development Commons as a youth researcher since 2019. We're very excited to host this webinar today on the topic of climate change. So first, I'll begin by introducing our three youth innovators from around the globe. Our first speaker will be Shiriel Noel, and she is a program specialist at OceanWise. Her research recognizes that waterways on the island of Montreal are facing many environmental threats due to human activity. And she believes that by designing and delivering blue public spaces, sustainable development can be achieved. Our second speaker will be Amir Kwasami. Amir is a researcher at Sustain MENA in Jordan. His research focuses on how to lower emissions in the transportation sector in Jordan. To solve this challenge, he believes in implementing a carpooling system that targets business zones to reduce traffic, transportation costs, emissions, and among other positive effects. And our final speaker will be Joe Henrique Alves Cerqueira, and he is the founder of the online platform called Si Climáticos, an electoral advocacy project that aims to qualify the climate crisis during Brazilian elections. And to combat this crisis in Brazil politically, the platform teaches basic lessons about the climate crisis to enrolled candidates, and has, since its creation, reached over 400 candidatures in Brazil. So I would like to welcome our speakers today, and we'll dive right into the conversation with Shiriel.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just gonna get my PowerPoint up and running. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm honored to be here today to present to you my vision for my community. Just as a small note, if anything resonates and you feel like sharing, feel free to reference me by email, just so people know where to find me. I've included my contact information at the end of the presentation, so feel free to jot it down then. I've also taken the liberty to pepper throughout my presentation some photos from the riverside parks in my community. So if you feel like the perspective is the same, it is, but I hope you enjoy. And before I commence, I'd like to offer a small land acknowledgement. And here in Canada, we offer these land acknowledgements kind of as a means to honor our commitments to reconciliation. So I'm coming to you from the lands traditionally recognized as Tiohtià:ke, now referenced as Montreal. And I would just like to express my eternal gratitude as a first-generation immigrant to the original stewards, who are the people of the Ganagihaaga, for just kind of preserving this land that I get to enjoy and call home today. So now let's look at how Oasis could trace the case for blue public, and in this instance, recreation space on the river island of Montreal. So this is just a little bit about me. You heard my bio, but just to highlight that I am a former Local Pathways Fellow, but really I'm coming to you. This project is kind of like a culmination of my love for the sea, and in this context, waterways. So I ultimately am a thalassophile. So let me just dive into my project. So the Local Pathways Fellowship is a program to kind of localize SDG 11. And in my case, for my project, I was looking specifically at target 11.7, but with a small twist. So with that twist, it reads, sorry. 1 second. By 2030, provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green, blue, and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. So just to note, like, that is the audience for my project, although I think that this has relevance for all Montrealers. So the concept is, this is what the pitch is. By designing and developing riverside parks, these spaces would be reconceptualized as blue spaces rather than green spaces with blue features. So it's interesting to note that when we are looking at what are green spaces, they oftentimes do kind of border the water or have streams, creeks, rivers kind of flowing through them, but they're always kind of the secondary focus. So by kind of repurposing these spaces as blue spaces, the blue is now kind of the central focus in the feature. So Oasis utilizes a dual-pronged approach to address both environmental and social needs. So let's take a look at what environmental needs there are. So this was a photo I took in 2019 of a flooding event that happened in the spring. And there, just to note, there was another one that happened in 2017 as well. So flood management is definitely something that needs to be looked into. And from my perspective, if we kind of create a blue park network, it creates kind of a corridor that can, there's more territory for the spring thaw to be absorbed. So this could kind of be included in the greater flood management strategy, and it just kind of creates more options. And it's important to note that with climate change, the frequency and intensity of these flooding events are kind of just predicted to increase. So yeah, if we're kind of looking to house recreation in blue spaces, I think it's kind of important to look at the environmental quality of the water that we want people to be recreating in. So me personally, I live 2 minutes away from the river and I've never once been swimming in it. So that's something that we kind of like need to look into through this project if we are kind of to create blue public space. And what are the social needs? So by kind of critically looking at the design, we can look at increasing access throughout the season. So how do these spaces transition from summer to fall to winter? I noticed that there's a lot of usage during the summertime, but usage is decreased in the winter. But there's still beautiful spaces and places that people can use. So how do we kind of encourage that? They could act as beacons for waterway literacy. How I kind of envision this is kind of curating information panels that people can learn information about the natural habitat, the heritage, the cultural components as well. And where I live, there's kind of a lot of schools in the surrounding neighborhoods. So how do we kind of include these spaces in the curriculum in a more meaningful way? So yeah, there's an increased options for outdoor leisure activities. So in my vision, people could be windsurfing, kite surfing. There are people fishing, doing more swimming activities. So these would have kind of mental health benefits and physical benefits for the users. And it's interesting to note that most of the literature that is available on Blue Public Space kind of highlights that mental health focus. And as COVID-19 has demonstrated, there's kind of a need for more space that can accommodate for people, for users to kind of use it, but also maintaining physical distancing. So these spaces could really act as an oasis in times of pandemic. So the rationale behind this, why is this an opportune time to kind of look at this topic? So it's the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which means that globally there'll just be more attention on blue space. So Montreal could kind of emerge as a leader in this type of planning. As I mentioned before, it directly supports the localization of target 11.7. But as I mentioned, the environmental needs, it touches on SDG 13, which is climate action, and also 14, which is life below water. So if we're looking at more local reasons, in 2006, Montreal was designated as a UNESCO City of Design. And building on that momentum, I noticed that this vision policy document was released last year. So there's kind of an opportunity to challenge our design within this framework, and this directly is in support of this project. And then the Grand Parc de l'Ouest, sorry, is a project that's going ahead, and it's going to kind of, let me get the figures, sorry. It will add a total of 3,000 hectares of parkland, and it will kind of create 1,600 hectares as newly classified. So it will be the largest urban park in Canada. So there is an opportunity to explore blue public space within this project, but also my project could serve as a complement to this project. So let's look at the objectives. Oasis is a sustainable development pilot project that will define, design, and deliver blue public recreation space throughout the river island of Jajabge. So some sample activities related to this. So in terms of define, I've kind of been doing some research over the past year through my fellowship on this topic, but more is obviously required. So I've actually been thinking about maybe doing a PhD, but we kind of have to collaborate and do more research on this topic. And I actually met a couple of ladies that were going to kind of do a research initiative to kind of hitch blue public space and build momentum for within the Blue Cities initiative. In terms of design, I have applied for funding and I'm hoping to run a design competition this year. So if you have any experience running a virtual charrette or hackathon design competition, feel free to get in touch. And then in terms of deliver, there's a really, really cool opportunity. I just applied for the city's participatory budget, and they're able to sponsor projects that have a budget between 500,000 and 3 million. So fingers crossed, send me your good juju, but it's not the only means of delivering blue public space. So yeah, in sum, let's review the strengths of this project. So it kind of challenges the traditional approach to planning and thinking about public space. And I've always kind of wondered, like, why we haven't kind of highlighted that. And I have some philosophical reasonings, but I think it's couched in the reason that we are land-based mammals. So the blue spaces are not spaces that we totally understand. And I think that it's necessary because we do live in harmony with our waterways, and waterways are the point of urbanization. So Oasis can also create a platform for Montreal to be distinguished as a leader in the planning for riparian spaces. It increases our options in terms of flood management, which will become a really important issue in the coming years. And it will protect and rehabilitate these sensitive coastal ecosystems. And if we are kind of developing more blue public space, it will create greater equity in shoreline access, which I kind of flag as a little bit of an issue here in the city. So ultimately, my project will hopefully catalyze Montreal's social and ecological transformation and directly support sustainable development efforts. So thank you so much. And this is my contact information.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that very detailed presentation. I loved how you went into the rationale, the clear plan for implementation, and just by highlighting that by directly localizing SDG 11 in particular, there's a variety of environmental, economic impacts, and of course, potentially the saving of human lives. So definitely very important. Do you have some questions here that I would love to hear your input on? So naturally with a project of this scale, of course, I was just wondering what kind of support do you need at this point in your project? I know there are some parts of the presentation you said you're beginning to look into, perhaps pursuing a PhD. So as of right now, what kind of support do you feel would be adequate to continue on your efforts?
Yeah, maybe my colleagues are listening. This is not my main full-time gig. So for me, I don't have, it's mostly time. So it's when I have the time and energy. And COVID, my inspiration is very low. So if people are interested in this topic, I'm just love to discuss and have critical conversations about it, because it is kind of still in that, hopefully it'll be turning into a pilot project, but it is also like a conceptual exercise, I find.
And next, I was wondering, this is a very obviously important topic, but one, unfortunately, that's not talked about that much in the mainstream media, specifically related to flood management. So why was this concept of blue public space specifically of interest to you in the beginning?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, in the beginning, I think it's based in the fact that I'm like a River Island resident. So I noticed, I went abroad, did my studies, came back, and noticed that when I would talk about the work that I was kind of doing in marine spatial planning, waterways, I wasn't getting that connection with people here. Like, I think the island is quite large, but access is very limited. So people could spend months on months on months circulating throughout the city and not see the water. So I think that's part of the issue. There's no access. People aren't thinking about it. It's a realm we don't really understand. We're land-based mammals. Yeah.
Definitely. I can definitely relate to that as well. I'm from South Florida and grown up near the water all my life, but I feel at this point taken a little for granted, and we don't appreciate the kind of natural benefits of living near it and potentially transforming that with our green spaces into blue spaces specifically. And one final question here, if you could expand upon the opportunities for city branding. We talked about this, how it's beneficial both on the international scale, but also locally for the island of Montreal. But if there are any other key opportunities you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think like with this large park that they're kind of trying to do, there's an opportunity for tourism. Like, come visit our Blue Park network. Montreal has like a extensive festival season, so there's opportunities to kind of include that within the offering. I think. Oh, I have so many ideas with this, but yeah, in terms of like curating the interpretive signage, Montreal, kind of our waterways are really important in the colonization of Canada, so that history could be of interest to other people, but it should definitely be of interest to people here. And I think that it's something that we kind of forget, its importance. And yeah, I have so many ideas. Sorry, they're all like escaping me right now. But yeah, I think kind of including it in the curriculums, we can foster a blue generation, and future, we can have like an army of waterway stewards, so that this will never really be forgotten,
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you once again for the presentation and those very great answers. And again, if anyone's interested, you have Shirel's contact information right here. And yeah, we can now move on to our next speaker. I'll hand it off to Amir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kyle. And a big thank you for the UNICEF and GDC for this huge opportunity to share my experience. And let me share as well my screen. So hopefully you can see it right now. Okay. So thanks again for letting me share my experience within the UN Sdsm Youth Local Pathways Fellowship. And I'm based in Amman, Jordan, and my an investigation area was Amman. I've been looking into the SDG 11.2, which is targeting a safe, sustainable, and reliable transportation system for all. So I've been investigating how to improve the green mobility in Amman for all people. So to give you a little bit about Jordan, Jordan is located in the Middle East in a very unique location filled with conflicts, bordering with Syria, Iraq, Palestine, and Saudi Arabia. And that caused a large influx of refugees in the past decades into Jordan, resulting with 10.8 million people now. 3.7 million of them are in Amman. So this actually has put a huge pressure on the transportation system in Jordan, and mainly the public transport system. It's been deteriorated already, but this caused the pressure to be more and more, and for people to move into car ownership instead of taking the public transportation system. So we've been witnessing a 5.3% increase in car ownership, resulting in a one vehicle per 6 people, which is a very large ratio for such a very compact location such as Amman. So The transportation system in Jordan is not reliable, not safe, not accessible. We lack a multimodal transportation system, so we don't have metros, trams, rapid buses. We have a very weak pedestrian infrastructure, a complete absence of cycling infrastructure. So the most convenient choice for people was moving into cars and private cars, and this actually has resulted in the transportation sector to be the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the country. This acts as a challenge and an opportunity as well. A challenge because it's exacerbating climate change and global warming and all of these environmental negative effects. And an opportunity because if we could somehow decarbonize the sector as the second emitter to greenhouse gas emissions, we can reduce the reliance on imported energy because Jordan imports almost 90% of its energy needs. And due to these circumstances and very low access to transportation, this is actually exacerbating human security issues as well for gender, for poverty, for employment. So we've seen a total unemployment rate of 23 or almost 24%, and mainly for women 33%. And basically, a study in Jordan has been conducted that points that around 50% of women points to the transportation sector as the main challenge for them to reject job offers. So this had made me think of what's the problem in the sector and how we can move it and shift it towards a more sustainable transportation sector. So throughout my study and investigation, I decided to write a policy paper, and I have presented it to policymakers in Jordan in the past month. It hasn't been published yet, but it's soon to be published in order to advocate policymakers to shift towards a multimodal transportation system that has trams, buses, metros, walking and cycling in its heart. So we would have a more accessible and reliable transportation sector. And eventually I came into the localized carpooling system and built a business model that had a platform for people to be matched in that platform for carpooling. And why the reason for people to, and employees mainly, to carpool is to save money, to save all costs associated with car ownership, fees, fuel bills, to have less crowded streets, faster commutes, less stress, and more social outlet. So in Jordan, we have somehow business clusters. So all these corporations, institutions are located in some kind of one location. So if we can have people to commute together, carpool together, as they go almost in and out at the same time, that would be solving a great challenge for the rush hour. And in order to make employees carpool more, the platform proposes partnerships with corporations in order to incentivize employees throughout incentives as credit in their accounts on the platform. So why would corporations do that? Because it would save them more money in terms of the insurance they incentivize employees with. It would have impact on parkings and opening up more spaces for customers, and as well as recognition for participation in this community. To take this platform a step further, it proposes a partnership with the government, and that would translate it as an incentive and tax reduction for corporations. And this is going to be translated from corporations as incentives for employees back in order to ensure more and more employees to join this platform. And the main thing here for the government to participate in this business model is the reduction of the greenhouse gases that would result of this community. So This would help Jordan and the government in its commitment to the Paris Agreement in the SDGs, along with reducing its energy bill, as Jordan imports 90% or over 90% of its energy needs, along with more satisfaction of employees as they are accounting for a large proportion of the population. So this would result in a more satisfaction community, having a more or less human security issues. Finally, this platform would be as a marketing platform for those corporations who actually partnership with the platform. So they can have a marketing strategy through the platform. And as a final step, I'm going to be proposing that for some incubators here in Jordan, and hopefully that's going to be done in the next month. Thank you, and I'm happy to have any questions about the idea.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that presentation. I loved how the beginning of the presentation was framed from the increase in private vehicle ownership and this lack of a multimodal transportation system, and how that kind of brought attention to some innovative solution that was needed in the region, of course, being carpooling. And in particular, I loved how the graphics in this presentation really broke down the ideas, and they were very didactic in that they showed kind of the numerous actors and parties that are involved in implementing this platform for public use. So with that stated, I was wondering if there currently is demonstrated public support for carpooling in the region currently, because of course, having the public behind the initiative is something that's very important. And I was wondering if you found that to be present throughout your research.
That's great. So great question. So basically, there is no any carpooling initiatives in Jordan. That's why actually the reason behind me thinking about this idea, because we haven't seen any organized systematic carpooling initiatives before. However, there's no governmental support. I'm trying to propose this after proving efficiency and the reliability of this platform to the government, as I've been consulting with some transportation experts, and they have suggested to prove, first of all, the efficiency of the platform, and then propose it to the government. That would work more, because the government is always complaining about economical issues.
And speaking of the economic side of things, it's of course important that there's running capital to ensure that this platform continues on in the future, and it's not just like a one-year initiative. So what are your plans currently on making sure that this carpooling platform is economically sustainable?
So the main thing for sustaining this platform is going to be advertisements. So they would generate the needed amount of money to make it more sustainable. The idea does not propose any financial or let's say any profit out of it. So it's completely a voluntary platform and would depend on advertisement to like generate income for its sustained operation.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And also, of course, we're speaking about how private vehicle ownership has increased in Jordan as a whole. And of course, that's mainly because there's a convenience factor to individuals. When you don't have that transportation system, you can get to point A, point B pretty effortlessly with their own vehicle. So when implementing this carpooling system, when do you believe that this platform will surpass kind of the convenience of having private vehicles in the region?
Great. So basically, that's one of the reasons I have decided to start this initiative in the clusters of business zones, because basically they just go in and out of these zones in some certain times. So if we could ensure that they are not taking the unreliable public transportation system that we are currently have, and instead they can go with some maybe a community or worker or a co-worker who works at the same company, that would be more acceptable and in terms of employee behavior. So if we can, first of all, improve that this is going to be working efficiently and more effectively, people can then transfer to having more carpooling. So first of all, ensuring the reliability of the system, having a good rating system, so they would know who they are going with and who they are like riding and riding the sharing the right with, and afterwards we can have it more in a more larger manner.
Mhm. Definitely. I see where that would be like a major component, the security of the passengers, ensuring they understand who they'll be with, make them more likely to continue to use the service and pass it on. Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Amir. We're now going to move on to our final presentation of the day, and we're going to be talking about electoral advocacy in Brazil.
Hi, everyone. This is João. And first, before I open my presentation, I really want to thank you for this opportunity to showcase our project. It's really such an honor. I'm based here in Brazil, in the city of Curitiba, and I'm gonna share my screen. Is it working? Yes. Okay. Whoa. So I'm here today representing Clima de Eleição, or as we like to say in English, it's time to have climate in the Brazilian election. We are an electoral advocacy project focused on qualifying the climate crisis debate during the Brazilian municipal elections of 2020. We are a group of young professionals and climate advocates from 3 different regions in Brazil that have a broad experience with international climate negotiations while also working towards internalizing them into our national and local realities. And how did our story begin? This is me. I'm from the state of Paraná that is experiencing the worst drought in 30 years. And my city, Curitiba, despite being the capital of Paraná state, is one of the most affected. The city wasn't adapted to face this event, and as a consequence, there are still people that don't have access to water to at least wash their hands in the middle of a COVID-19 health crisis. And this is the reality of more than 40 million people in Brazil. At the beginning of last year, I was selected for the Sdsm Local Pathways Fellowship, and one of our missions in that program was to build a project related to SDG 11 for our cities. And I decided to combine that with the work that I was already doing with the SDG 13 and invited 3 amazing friends to help me make this bold project happen. Each one of us in our team is from a different state, and we realized that none of the cities in Brazil are adapted and ready to face extreme climate events that will become more frequent. And we needed and wanted to do something to change that. Then we saw a window of opportunity. 2020 was election year in Brazil, and more than 5,000 cities were choosing new mayors and assembly representatives. In Brazil, municipalities are federative entities, which means that they have the autonomy to create and implement laws. We also needed to urgently include cities in the international climate agenda because adaptation has to happen at the local level. It's in the territories that the consequences of climate change are felt, and cities are in the front line of that. So it's fundamental that cities assume the role of protagonists now, especially when here in Brazil, we are facing a political crisis in the environmental field, with a lack of leadership of the federal government, which creates a governance gap. So how can we spread the climate agenda and show policymakers what they can do to take action? Well, we created a free online course with the goal to build capacity for future local representatives about the climate crisis and how to implement public policies in Brazilian cities and help to change this reality. Currently, the legislative representatives are not included in the climate discussion. So we have to bring this agenda to them and include more mayors and municipal assembly representatives in the international level. Since July 2020, we started making articulations with political parties. This way, we could reach more candidates and internalize the climate agenda into the political programs. Then we provide a course on climate and cities. In order to take the course, the candidates had to agree to have a meeting with our team in case they were elected. All people who finished the course not only received a certificate, but also were added to an open list of committed candidates, so the voters could also make a choice that was aligned with their values. We also analyzed all the capital cities' government plans to monitor how the climate agenda is evolving and being inserted in the municipalities. In the long run, we want to keep cultivating those relationships with the elected candidates and the parties so we can have a continuous advocacy incidence. Our course consists of a basic written material, a complementary reference sheet, and a pre-recorded video. There are 4 modules: climate science introduction, international and national climate policy, climate and cities, and municipal policies. And the course ends highlighting tools to create public policies for the candidates about adaptation and resilience, also showing the importance of civil society participation in all stages of the decision-making process. We especially bring examples of climate good practices, promoting exchange between cities' experiences, aiming to multiply those ideas. You can see some of those examples on the pictures, such as the urban gardens on the city of Curitiba, collective organic waste composting on the city of Florianópolis, cisterns for rainwater storage on the city of Recife, and building infrastructure resistant to extreme weather conditions in the city of São Paulo. We try to focus on Brazilian cities to show that our regional experience are working. And what have we achieved so far? 600 people enrolled in our course, being 54% of them women. Of those 600, 400 committed candidates enrolled in our course. We were also able to reach all the 5 regions and ecosystems of the country. Aside from the federal states, it is especially relevant to say we were able to go beyond the capital cities, reaching the countryside in over 250 different cities. At the same time, we were able to reach all the range of political parties, from right to left, covering all major political parties, reinforcing that the climate agenda is not a matter of political position, but of humanity survival, which is really relevant in the current situation in the political situation of Brazil at this point. Finally, 21 candidates that committed to our project were elected in 18 different Brazilian cities. One of the most incredible things that happened was that our project won a global competition among 61 other ideas from young people promoted by United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And therefore, we were invited to present our project to specialists from all over the world at COP26 in Glasgow next November. So what comes next? We want to go further. The paradigm shift that is needed to include the climate agenda in the urban, regional, and national level requires a long-term thinking. With that in mind, we have established a plan to continue to advocate in the climate agenda in Brazil. Our short-term goal is to support more elected candidates on creating climate policies in their own cities. We also want to go beyond Brazil's borders. And we are negotiating with a Mexican youth organization to implement our campaign methodology for the elections that will take place there in July 2021. And last but not least, we want to use the lessons and relations of the 2020 municipal elections to improve our campaign and bring climate agenda to the center of the debate of the next Brazilian national elections in 2022. We are the first project in Brazil to bring climate to the local level on a national scale. And what about Paraná's draw? We had 51 candidates from Curitiba taking the course and learning tools to adapt the city to extreme weather events such as the draw. Although no elected person in the city took our course, the impact we made was far beyond our best expectations. And we now want to engage the elected people in Curitiba and having them taking our course as well and committing to the climate agenda. Every day, the climate crisis is intensified and more people suffer its impacts, especially those who are already more vulnerable. We do not have time to wait for current political leaders to take the action we need. If they don't do it themselves, we, the youth, will teach them how. And that is why our project wants to empower future leaders at all levels of governance to do their part. I want to thank you once again for the opportunity to present our project for such an exquisite crowd. It's a great honor for me to discuss and show our idea and what we did so far in this project with you all. Those are the contacts of our project. So if you have any connection, any possibility of cooperation that you find we can have, please reach us out. And thank you very much. And I'm open to clarify any question or doubt. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that very in-depth presentation. Loved how the overarching kind of thesis for this project is that cities and their politicians really need to start leading the climate crisis narrative and to fill that governance gap that currently exists in many elections. And we're so grateful. You can see it in the chat. Everyone keeps on calling out the demonstrated success across the region, both in terms of reach, but also success in these global competitions, and really love the presence of a strong vision for the future through the long term to 2022. So with that, I'd love to jump into a few questions here. First off is, how do you plan on kind of gathering public support for climate change policies over the next few years? It seems like this is now focusing on, like you said, municipal elections, so politicians, teaching them about the climate crisis. How do you hope that that relays to the public?
Well, one thing that we've been noticing in our experience is that people are already aware that something is happening. Like every year the storms are getting stronger, the dry season it's getting longer. So for us, what is being really successful is to make this bridge between the perception that something has happened with this global phenomenon. So it's been something that we are managing to do it, but we still need more leaders that are capable to make this comprehension of these impacts and the global crisis.
Perfect. And with that, speaking about how more politicians should be taking up the torch to lead the climate crisis debate, why do you believe many subnational leaders currently have not implemented climate policies into their platforms?
Well, also based in our experience in this campaign, the main reason is that those leaders have never had access to this information. The discussion on climate has not reached subnational leaders until now, and few Brazilian cities have policies related to climate. In general, the big cities like São Paulo, Salvador, Rio de Janeiro, but this doesn't reach the countryside. So this doesn't mean that those leaders are climate deniers. Many actually would even like to work for more just and sustainable cities. They just don't know how to do it. And our project seeks to bridge this gap for them and include as many Brazilian leaders and cities as possible in this global agenda.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you brought that up, both sides of the political aisle. I know I'm not as familiar with the Brazilian political landscape as yourself, but in the United States, of course, climate change unfortunately has become a politically polarized topic. So great to hear that this project tries to involve both sides, especially on the subnational level. And kind of finally, you did allude to a little bit of this in your presentation with the longer term vision. But how do you see this project evolving to engage future political candidates in the online course, potentially even those beyond Brazil?
Well, as I mentioned, we want to go further. Like we made this pilot and we saw that even though we didn't have much capacity, most of the project was built without any resources, and we got this huge impact in our country. So we know it works. And we want to go to more cities, to more states. We want to go further. That's our idea. We are trying to get funding opportunities to make this project more sustainable for us. Like Siri mentioned, this is not our only gig. We all work, we all have another things to do. This is what we do in our spare time. So we are trying to make this more sustainable for us as professionals, and maybe if we get the funding and more capacity, we can like focus exclusively on this in this next year. We are really excited to make this project go further.
Perfect. And with that, we have concluded the speaker portion of this webinar, but now we'll move into live Q&A session from our audience. So we have some questions currently in our Q&A. We would love to have the attendees speak to them live. One of our technical support assistants will be unmuting you, and you can ask to the speaker that you would wish to ask your question. So with that, I would love to first have, and yes, if you would like to be unmuted, please do share them in our box and we can unmute you. If not, you can just private message the panelists and we can read out the question for yourselves. Okay, the first question comes from, and my apologies if I do mispronounce your name. First off, this question is for actually our last presenter. So from Rajav, we would love to unmute you and you can ask your question. It seems like there may be a few audio issues perhaps. So in the interest of time, I can ask the question. So the question is to you all, do you agree that the Amazon fires that made, of course, global headlines was a tipping point for mobilizing civil society members to take action in Brazil, or was it a climate movement brewing much before that?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Actually, the climate movement is really strong in Brazil for a few decades. And even though we didn't call it climate movement before, we have like a social environment, really strong movement with a lot of representatives of the traditional communities who have been advocating for social, environmental, and climate policies for the last decades in Brazil. So actually the Amazon fires got really famous on a global scale, but it was only one of the bad moments of our local reality we have been dealing in the past years. So inside Brazil, we have a really strong environmental and social environmental movement, which is now being more called as a climate movement, but it's really strong and it's not that young.
Perfect. And our next question is for Amir, sorry. The first question we have is, carpooling is a great initiative to reduce emissions. And do you see any risk of implementing this system from kind of a gender or child kind of protection perspective at all?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So first of all, there will be an option for female who wants to carpool with female drivers only. So this would minimize the risk of gender issues, along with the rating system that's going to be incorporated with the platform. So they would know who that person is and where he works and what he does. So along with a rating system, so that would increase the security of the system.
Perfect. Definitely some great safety mechanisms integrated into the platform. We have another question for yourself, and we'll let the speaker, we'll unmute the participant to ask the question. This is from Sdsm. Just take a second to be added Zoom functionalities. Okay, here we go.
Okay, I think that's me. This is Sdsm. Thank you very much. Very inspiring presentations, all of them. I'm glad that I took the time to attend it. my question to Amir was whether you are modelizing this. Of course, the impact will depend on the scale. So I was wondering, how fast this carpooling is going to be implemented, and how much we expect to gain economically and ultimately also in reducing carbon emission. Is there any projections on that?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. To answer the first part, the analysis on accessibility, it is existed for Amman area and could be and it's used for the functioning of the system. So that's why I've chosen the business zones as the first clusters to have this initiative for. And the second part, which is about the reduction in carbon emissions, this can be estimated, and it could be an added value for the platform for those employees who want to estimate their contribution in reducing the carbon reduction, along for the corporations who want to estimate the total reduction their employees have contributed to. So this could be an added value for the platform. Thank you for raising that up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for that wonderful question. We have another question back to Yul. We have, sorry, I'm scrolling to find the question. We'd love to unmute Nargiza if you would like to ask your question live. If you're having audio issues, feel free to write in the chat. We can read off the question as well. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll read off the question here. This is with regards to the platform that certifies the course. So if there, to you, if there's any agency that certifies the online platform, would it be a public institution? Basically, if there's any, I guess, oversight to who verifies the information.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, we don't have any agency certifying our course, but we were really careful to build our material only using reliable references. Most of them were the United Nations Habitat material that we could find online. And all of our material has links to these references. So although we don't have this certification, official certification, we try to take care of that. It's something that we really want to look in the future. So we know that we'll make our project more reliable if we have this certification, but with the time and the capacity that we had, this was the best we could do in this election.
Perfect. And with that, we have another question for Shiriel. We have a question kind of regarding where blue space projects are going to be implemented specifically, but also I think intertwined with that can be brought up once again, that question earlier about opportunities for city branding, if you would like to elaborate more so on that.
Sure, yeah, thank you so much for the question. I have my eye on a couple sites in my neighborhood. The thing about Montreal is that it's quite large. It's the second most populous river island in the world, which is something that's not celebrated enough or highlighted enough. It's so that's kind of what I wanted to expand on in terms of city branding. Like that's like a golden opportunity. But in terms of proposed sites, I've been doing this practice every day where I go to the riverside parks in my neighborhood, and I've gone quite far and explored the ones that I have access to. And I noticed that there's just like a lack of thought, in my opinion, in terms of the design. So I have one site that I'm really particularly interested in Pierrefonds, that's behind a school. And it's interesting because like in terms of that target audience or the population that target 11.7 examines, there was a murder that happened not too long ago. And so that there is safety features that we need to kind of be thinking about in these spaces. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, definitely. And with that, I think we can ask one more question. We'll let Alex, I know you've been waiting for a little bit. I believe your question is to Amir as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the three panelists for presenting their initiatives. I'm really impressed by all the energy you have. And I think it's great to see young people do that. So congratulations to the three of you. My question is actually to Joao. I was really impressed by the scope of your initiative, and considering all the activities that you have, I was wondering how many people are on your team and what kind of profiles you have working with you. Thank you very much.
Hi, Alex. Thank you very much for your question. So at first, I was by myself on the first months. And then I realized that this project was too crazy to do by myself. And then I invited two friends of mine to be part of the team. And at the end, when the elections were arriving, we invited one more friend. So we were at the end of the process on a team of 4 young professionals. I myself am an environmental engineer. One of the other team members is as well. And we also have a law student and an internationalist. So we have different professional profiles. We work in different organizations on our daily basis. So we were only 4. And I hope that this year we get a bigger team to make this project go further.
Perfect. And with that, we'd like to close this Q&A session. I want to thank all the audience members for submitting such wonderful questions, and for those that asked live, thank you for doing so. And with that, I would like to once again thank all of our speakers and of course attendees as well for taking out the time to present here today and for joining this conversation. And we ask both audience members and speakers alike, if you, after this conversation, could go to the gdc.unicef.org to join in on the conversation and to further elaborate on these projects and causes as well, and to add any content you think would help and propel the message that you put forth here today. And we ask everyone on this webinar to please stay tuned for next month's youth webinar as well, where we continue the conversation on sustainable development challenges and how youth innovators globally are confronting such challenges. And I'll now pass it off to UN to continue on.
Nothing more to say except to thank you everyone, and realize that we at UNICEF would like to support youth change makers like the 3 that you've heard today, doing this really in their part-time. So you can imagine that if they had the full-time capacity and resources, the magnitude of change that could happen. So just remember, I mean, even in the United States and where Kyle is from, you saw how the Parkland the catastrophe resulted in a massive wave over time from 2017 of gun safety legislation. So it really starts locally. It starts with younger generations, and specifically for climate change, I think the younger generation will move this forward in a way that we haven't yet seen. So stay tuned to this space. Thank you so much for joining, and please do go to gdc.unicef.org, ask your question, and reach out to all of the panelists. Their content will be free and open source for everyone. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.